Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Jerry Blasson, President and CEO of Comply Assistant. I'll be your moderator for today. You can see the title of today's webinar, Covered Entities Should Periodically Audit Third-Party Vendors / Business Associates. We're going to cover why, what, and how to do it. So next slide, Mac. So the objectives for today's webinar are to provide an overview of what has changed for BAs in respect to Omnibus since September 2013 with the final rule, discuss how to develop and sustain effective vendor management practices to ensure compliance, a 5-step life cycle approach with supporting actions for managing vendor security requirements, provide useful resources and tools to use in a vendor management program, and to share proven best practice strategies for provider organizations. So a little bit of housekeeping. All attendees will be on mute for the duration of the presentation. We ask that any and all questions be directed in the Q&A panel that you see, you should be able to see on your panel. And we will try to answer as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. The webinar is scheduled to last 1 hour, but we can stay on longer for Q&A at the end, and all of you are welcome to do the same. And if we do not have a chance to answer your questions, we're going to provide contact information at the end of the webinar, and you can feel free to contact any one of us at any time. Next slide, please. So the webinar will be uploaded to the New Jersey HIMSS website as a PDF, and it is also being recorded. We will place the recording also on our websites and in some HIPAA-related LinkedIn groups. And we have included bios at the end of the presentation. So it is my pleasure to introduce our 3 excellent panelists, Mac McMillan, Francois Baudouin, and Lou Dignam. So Mac McMillan is co-founder and CEO of Synergistic, a firm specializing in the areas of information security and regulatory compliance in healthcare. Mac is the current chair of the HIMSS Privacy and Security Policy Task Force and was recognized in 2012 as a HIMSS Fellow. Mac brings over 30 years of combined intelligence, security countermeasures, and consulting experience to his position from both government and private sector positions. He has worked in the healthcare industry since his retirement from the federal government in 2000. He sits on the HIT Exchange and HC Pro editorial advisory boards, as well as the Health Tech Industry Advisory Board. He has contributed to more than 300 articles and postings in healthcare IT magazines, healthcare IT blogs, and other healthcare newsletters. Mac presents regularly at conferences and other events and was a contributing author to the HIMSS book, Information Security in Healthcare, Managing Risk. Mac is retired from the U.S. Marine Corps. Francois Baudouin is the Technology Director and Information Security Officer at South Jersey Healthcare and is in charge of the servers, workstations, the networks, TV services, and telephony. Francois has 20 years of healthcare experience in IT. He also teaches IT at Cumberland College as an adjunct professor. Francois is a previous president of the International Management Council and has acquired the Certified Manager certification. Francois has obtained his CISSP certification from ISC2, as well as the MCSE Security Plus certification from Microsoft, and Francois is a member of DV and NJ HIMSS. And finally, Lou Dignam is Director of Information Security and Server Platforms at Virtua. Lou has 28 years of technical healthcare IT experience, 12 of which was specialized in information security. Lou joined Virtua in July 2008 as the Director of Information Security and Server Platforms, HIPAA Security Officer, to oversee all information security efforts around regulatory and audit compliance, policy development, technology risk management, and vulnerability management, and to develop and deliver a comprehensive information security program for Virtua. Lou obtained his CISSP back in 2006 and has extensive technical knowledge in information security management, IT risk management and assessment, network technology, server technology, and desktop technology. So with that, let's turn it over to Mac.
These type of webinars are always the most fun because they actually, hopefully, will provide some very practical knowledge for the folks that are attending, and we have a couple of folks who are in the front lines of dealing with these kinds of things who will be able to share not only their experiences but what they're doing to handle the whole aspect of vendor security management under the new rules. So it's really I think a good session that we're going to have here. And the second part of this, once I get through talking about the requirement, I think will be the most interesting when Lou and Francois begin to share their experiences peer-to-peer, so to speak. So first of all, if we have any business associates listening in today, and for those of us that deal with this issue from the covered entity side of it in terms of working on these kinds of things, I see this all the time. I hear this all the time, that there is still a lot of debate going back and forth as to whether or not I am a business associate, or whether or not this does apply to me, or what applies to me and how much of it applies to me. But hopefully we've worked through a lot of those things, and we're in that final phase, or that acceptance phase, if you will, with respect to this experience. And because September of last year is already passed, and we're fast approaching September of this year, when all of our BA agreements are supposed to be up to speed and reflect the new changes. So today we're going to talk about how we go about managing vendor security a little bit differently than in the past, because things have changed. I know some of you have probably realized that Mr. Rodriguez is leaving OCR. In fact, one of his hearings was this past week, and I believe his actual full vote is maybe today with respect to his new position over at the Department of Homeland Security. And they have not named a successor to him yet, but certainly once he is confirmed in his new position, that will probably happen very quickly, and so we'll have a new person heading up OCR. In the meantime, however, he did signal quite a few changes when he came on board, and one of those was that he was going to step up the enforcement activities of the organization, and he was going to enhance their capabilities to do that. And he actually did quite a few things, made quite a few changes that did that. The OCR audits, as you know, the pilot year was 2012. Those audits are going to resume next month using internal resources, and they have hired security and audit personnel to run that process for them now. They are sending out their survey to 1,200 entities, 800 covered entities, and 400 business associates to select the organizations for the permanent audit program, which will begin in October. So that program is in fact going to happen. It's already been funded, and it's already being planned, and they're collecting the data now to do that. In addition to that, they automated the complaint process at OCR, which absolutely doubled the number of complaints that they receive on a regular basis. And they have hired folks to assist them in the investigation process around breaches, so that they now have the capability not only to look at the larger breaches, which they are obligated to do, but they have the ability to actually look at smaller breaches and begin to determine whether some of those need follow-up as well. So the environment that we're operating in today is much different than it was just a couple of years ago, and a lot of that has to do with changes that Mr. Rodriguez brought in when he took over that organization. So we have this new paradigm, and it applies not only to covered entities, but it applies to business associates as well. HIPAA, as you know, the basic rule defined what a business associate was, but there was always a lot of confusion around that. So with the new revision in high tech, they expanded that definition, and they actually clarified it quite a bit. So really, it's really pretty simple now. If you create, receive, maintain, or transmit protected health information on behalf of a covered entity, you are a business associate. And there are certain exemptions or exceptions to that they have identified that are more clearly defined, and they more clearly define the whole exemption around conduits. And they made it very clear that a conduit you are only a conduit if the time that you retain PHI in your environment is only the time that is related to the transference process. So if you retain information beyond what is required to literally transmit that data from one point to the other, then you are a business associate. So in other words, you can't back it up, you can't keep a copy, you can't retain some of it for some period of time. It literally has to just pass through. And that is a very important distinction. One that I don't think is covered in here, but I'll go ahead and cover it as well because I still hear this from time to time, is people are still under the impression, or some folks are still under the impression that if you have a healthcare entity's information and it's encrypted, but you don't have the key to decrypt that information, that you are somehow relieved of your business associate responsibilities. That is not true either. It doesn't matter whether the information that you're retaining is encrypted or not. The rule is clear. If you retain, receive, transmit, etc., PHI, regardless of what state it's in, you are a business associate. And the reason for that is that there are more requirements around that information than just access. So simply encrypting it does not relieve us of our responsibilities as a business associate. Subcontractors was also incorporated into the new rule in a more prescribed way, so that people would understand that this responsibility does not just go from the covered entity to the primary business associate, but it also transcends all the way down to however far through subcontractors layer to subcontractor to independent contractor. It doesn't matter. If somebody is receiving, transmitting, maintaining PHI on behalf of a covered entity or on behalf of another business associate, they too are a business associate. And that business associate that they work for has the same responsibilities for ensuring that they have a business associate agreement that the covered entity has for the primary business associate. Can we avoid HIPAA? And the answer is no. If you receive, transmit, process, etc., PHI, you are a business associate, and you cannot avoid its responsibilities. The other thing is that if you don't have a business associate agreement per se, that does not let you give you a get out of jail card either. If somebody forgets to give you a business associate agreement, then they're responsible for their non-compliance as it relates to that agreement, but you are still responsible for your business associate responsibilities as it relates to that information. So that does not negate those responsibilities. Secondly, if you know you're not supposed to have access to protected health information in order to do whatever it is that you're doing on behalf of that covered entity, but you receive it anyway, you are still a business associate. That does not obviate your responsibility once you take possession of that information. So it's very important, and we need to understand that it really comes down to what you do, and it comes down to an issue of possession, not necessarily whether or not there's an agreement in place. One of the other changes that we saw was around breach notification, and we had the interim rule come out initially back in 2009, which had the harm provision in it, which again created a lot of confusion for a lot of folks, and it basically put the emphasis on in quite frankly the wrong area, which was proving harm. And the reason that was the wrong area was because in a lot of cases when breaches occur, we can't prove harm right away. It's not until much later that we actually see the true impact of a breach, and that's especially true when we start talking about things like medical identity theft. Oftentimes information is lost or compromised or stolen, and it's not until years later that the actual identity theft occurs or the event occurs that triggers that. And so putting the emphasis on determining what harm was to an individual really was putting the emphasis in the wrong place. The new rule, the final rule, basically says if we lose possession, lose control of protected health information, it is presumed to be a breach. The minute it ends up in the wrong hands, goes to the wrong place, we don't know where the item is, it's stolen, etc., breach is presumed. The way we avoid notification under the new rule is either through safe harbor, which is a carryover from the interim rule, which still is in effect, or by determining that the likelihood of compromise of that information was low by going through a simple risk analysis process, which they provide as well as part of the rule, which provides 4 basic questions that we have to answer. Again, if we don't know where the device is, if it wasn't encrypted, if it went to the wrong recipient, etc., it is a breach, and we have to deal with it. So we already know, and we've already seen that the number of breaches reported is going to go up as a result of this change in the rule. The other thing that's important to recognize in this process is that the business associate is still only obligated to report a breach to the covered entity. They have no responsibility to report that breach to others or up the line, say, to Health and Human Services. So that responsibility still rests with us as the covered entity. What that means is that we are forever linked to those business associates that work for us with respect to that responsibility. So there needs to be close coordination in our BA processes around how we handle breaches or incidents around data. Which gets us to the last part of this first part, which is those high-tech revisions to business associate agreements. Business associates are responsible for complying with the HIPAA security rule, the entire HIPAA security rule, and that should be reflected in our business associate agreement. They are responsible for also following those aspects of the privacy rule that are appropriate to what they're doing for us. And so there are certain minimum requirements that apply from a privacy perspective that need to be applied as well. They have to notify us when breaches occur, and the timing around that is significant in some states. For instance, if you're in California where you have 5 days to report a breach, the 60 days that the federal government gives you is not quite going to cut it for those entities out there. So we need to pay attention to both the state and the federal requirements for notification when we're putting these BA agreements together. It must obligate the business associate to ensure that its subcontractors agree in writing to these requirements as well, and that they receive a business associate agreement as well from that primary business associate. And if the business associate is going to carry out any obligations on our part, then that too needs to be delineated and agreed upon in this agreement process. So what about updating these BAs? Well, first of all, any agreement that was in place prior to January the 25th, when this rule first came out, was grandfathered until September of this year, meaning you did not have to update those right away. You were given additional time to update all of those existing agreements and to bring them into compliance. For any new agreement after that date, those had to be in compliance with the new rule as of September of last year. And any agreement that either expired or was modified or what have you, that too had to be brought into compliance with the new rule prior to September of last year, or whenever that modification or change occurred. So basically, by this September, we should have all of our business associates identified. We should have all of our BA agreements brought up to speed with respect to their content, and we should have new business associate agreements in place as of the 1st of October with every single one of those business associates that we're currently doing business with. This kind of brings us to the real crux of today's conversation, which is really, how do we go about managing these folks in an effective manner? And I think everybody who's been involved in this has probably seen any one of these excuses or any one of these comments made from a number of your business associate relationships, in in terms of whether or not they are or aren't a business associate, et cetera. The bottom line is the covered entity makes the determination as to whether or not the organization that they're doing business with is a business associate, and they make that determination based on whether or not they are sharing protected health information with them. You know if you're giving someone protected health information or if you're giving them access to protected health information, and if that is occurring, then they are a business associate in most cases. Things like whether or not they're an agent, that's another important distinction that we need to think about going forward, because that, again, puts more responsibility on the covered entity than before. Breach notification time frames, just how we transmit data back and forth with one another, whether or not they're in country or out of country or use offshore resources to do part of what they do. Things like cyber insurance, indemnification, and state laws, et cetera. All of these things need to be considered as part of our business associate negotiations and our business associate agreements. And so it is, quite frankly, pretty complex when you think about it. So what do we need to do? Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to make sure that we know who all of our BAs are. And one of the things that I recommend to folks is, while you're going through and identifying who these folks are, is do something like check your accounts payable roster in terms of who you're paying money to, and use that as a tool to help identify maybe business associates that weren't captured that should have been. So make sure that you do a thorough review of who your business associates are. Make sure your agreements are up to date, and make sure that you're keeping track of all of these agreements that you have to keep track of. What are those vendor management expectations that we've seen from OCR audits and from other things where they've given us some insight into the things that they look for? Well, it's pretty simple. They are looking for more of a life cycle approach to how we manage this relationship and the protection of the information that we share with these people. One of the things that they looked for were pre-contract due diligence steps, for instance. In other words, what did we do to determine that the vendors that we were looking at were perhaps capable of meeting the obligations that they were going to take on in this contract. Making sure that the right information was conveyed during the contract process or during the business associate agreement process. Making sure that once that agreement was in place, that we had the right processes in place to handle things that might occur or come up, things like incidents, things like disaster recovery if they're hosting a system for us or hosting our data, things like physical protection around their facility where they might have our information, et cetera, et cetera. And last but not least, that we have a good, clean process for termination, if you will, of the agreement and return or disposition of the data. So when we look at it, one of the things that we talk about, and one of the things that the two gentlemen that are going to talk next are going to talk about, is this whole life cycle approach in terms of defining those requirements around what we're doing with a particular vendor, how we actually select the right vendor, and the criteria that maybe we look at and use, and the things that we do to support that process, the requirements around the contracting process itself, and then what level of monitoring is reasonable after you actually have this relationship in place, and how to actually go about the process of termination. When you look at it from an administrative and an operational perspective, on the administrative side, you're going to have things like researching your accounts payable, like you heard me say before, in terms of validating who your business associates are. You're going to have things like collecting vendor information so that you can create this database or this system that you're going to use to monitor these folks. And you're going to have to use some kind of a system. And many of our hospitals today have hundreds, if not thousands, of business associates. And doing this manually is probably not going to be really practical. Requirements definition, classification of vendors. Vendors are not all created equal. Vendors who actually host our information are more of a risk to us than, for instance, somebody who just periodically accesses our system or who has only incidental access to information by virtue of being in our facility. The security requirements around a particular contract, or that may be related to each one of those classifications, and what minimal necessary means, which is something that we're going to have to give a lot more thought to going forward, and particularly pay attention to the minimal necessary rule when it comes out. The solicitation process, the contract process, which I've already talked about, again, there's administrative requirements there. And on the operational side, as we've seen from the lessons learned from the audits and whatnot, we have things like performance monitoring. What are they doing with respect to keeping us apprised of what they're doing with our data and with our systems and the things that they're doing to support our processes. Incident response and how we work together to handle those things in an efficient manner. And then last but not least, terminations as it relates to both the contract and personnel on their side who may be leaving their system. So, with that, I'd like to turn it over to Francois and to Lou so that they can take you through more of a practical discussion of this whole process and talk to you peer-to-peer.
Okay, this is Francois. Good afternoon, everybody. So Max already addressed the necessity of this process that we're discussing. And we're going to, Lou and I will present how we are approaching the handling of business associates. I can tell you that the Inspire Health Network is still in the process of setting up. We have been contacting some vendors and had some pushback, and I'll discuss that a little later. As Mac has specified, we use a life cycle approach in our management of business associates. In other words, when we deal with a new vendor, we determine if they are a business associate from the beginning, which means they're going to go through the regular vendor sanction check. And then if they are a business associate, we'll send them a security questionnaire. And then after that, every year we're in business with them, we'll send them a yearly survey. One thing that we had to do in the beginning was to get our house in order, and that meant we had a lot of work to do. We had to do a BA inventory. We had to check that the business associate agreements were in place. And all that required a lot of work, and I'll discuss that into more detail later. And then finally, what I'm going to talk about is finding a methodology as well as a management tool. What I mean by that is the management tool, this process is so involved that this cannot be a manual process as far as we're concerned. It's something that has to be automated, and we found a good way to do this over the web, and that helps. And on top of that, we utilize a third party to manage the process for us. We've been very successful doing that in different security functions that we perform at Inspire Health Network. So we figured that this would work very well for this concept. Lou?
Yes, and as Francois had mentioned, so I'm sure everybody uses some kind of tool or different spreadsheets to keep track of this. So we at Virtua are also looking at, a simplified tool somewhere to consolidate all this information. So, if and when there is an audit, we can go one place to keep track of everything. So, but it's very important to make sure you pull in the right departments and executive leadership. So, purchasing and materials management, they are the primary contact at Virtua out to our vendors for the business associate agreements. So they're definitely a good department to pull in, and you definitely need to get executive support because there will be some pushback from the business associates in order to complete some of the questionnaires that. You also need to pull in your privacy and security teams and business folks around this. So like anything else, you start to roll it out, you tweak it as things go on, and make adjustments. But it's very important to pull in the right groups. So the approach, first, like Francois mentioned, you want to have a complete BA inventory, and then you roll right into the program setup. So you set up the portal. We are also going to be working with a similar application. It's actually Comply Assist with the help of Synergistic, but I'm sure other people may have other things set up. Then you're going to want to do a functional analysis, send and monitor results. So you're going to send your questionnaires out. You'll have letters you'll send out first as an introduction to the program. Then, of course, you're going to look at the analysis of the results, process review, and then kind of cycle through it again. Tweak things as necessary and keep adjusting this program to make it more of a fine-tuned process.
Yeah, so the nice thing about the approach is as a good process, it self-adjusts, and there's improvement of the process that is built in. Of course, we start over, and it's going to be a constant process. So as far as the BA inventory, the first thing was to identify who maintains this BA inventory. Is it legal in their contract management software? Is it material management? This is something that you have to determine because it does require a certain level of maintenance as well as oversight. Then the next step for us was to review our BA inventory, make sure it was as accurate as possible. So we obviously looked in AP, but we looked in other areas of all of our databases, including our contract management software. We also looked in IT, and we looked at who does support for our applications. And because we have a list of people to call when we have issues, this is a good list of all the vendors. We also looked at our secure FTP site, because this is where if we exchange EPHI with a vendor or with business associate, we're going to use our secure FTP site if possible. So this is a good source to make sure you didn't forget anyone there. The other thing we did in Comply Assistant, we use a tool that allows us to survey all the directors in the organization. I will tell you that in the first pass of the survey, we got a 50% response, which for a survey it's great, but for an internal survey of all directors was not that great. But the tool allows us to just resend the survey very simply and monitor the responses. So that's working out pretty well. While you do your BA inventory, it's a good time to categorize your vendors. And the way I'm looking at that is you have to look at the risk that the vendor is presenting to Inspire Health Network. And depending if they are hosting our data or if just coming in every now and then to maintain the OR arm that has data in it. This is also a good time to make sure that if the vendors are hosting the data, business associates are hosting the data, you have the SSA 16, you have a copy of it. Good time to check if you have business associate agreements with the business associates, because when we did our inventory, we realized that we were missing a few agreements. So that was a good time to look at it. And then last but not least for us, we selected 10 business associates to start with a pilot. We really had to try to hone the process to tune it up so that it worked well. And we did not want to start with everybody. The Big Bang Theory doesn't really apply there. A pilot is much better. So we selected 10 business associates. Lou?
Yeah, I just want to add one more place. you want to look at some of the sites you have VPN connections to also. So you may not have, just secure FTP, but VPN connections, like, so you may have interfaces with different companies over a VPN. So that's another great place to grab that stuff from. So the next step was program setup. So this is the first step. You're going to want to identify, what tool you're going to use for your governance, risk management, and compliance software. Like was mentioned before, both Francois and myself, we are going to go with Comply Assist, but you may already have something you're using. Then you're going to determine whether you're going to try to do this yourself or you want to have some kind of hosted application. We're both, Francois and I, we are both looking at hosted with some assistance because, one of the big things is, there is a lot of follow-up. So we're both going to work with Synergistic to actually help follow up with the vendors because, I know every organization gets really busy, and it's a great help having someone follow up on some of these things for you so you can actually look at just the super important things. So you want to create letters. So this is, one of the things you want to do is have your letter of introduction about what you're trying to do, send the letters to the vendors. You want to also have, your security, legal, and purchasing all review the letter together to make sure everybody's in agreement before you send it out. You want to send out, your questionnaires. Think about what different questions, depending on what category the vendor is. If it's a vendor that's hosting your data, you may want to ask. You definitely will want to ask a lot more questions versus someone that they just have a support account for your people if there's an issue, which everybody I'm sure is controlling the access of their vendor. So make sure that any of these questions that come back get reviewed with your teams, and then you can submit these questions via the tool. I find it much easier using a web tool, some kind of portal where all that information can be gathered in one spot, and just make sure you can allow for attachments because that's important because if you're going to request an SSA 16, that way they can just upload that into the portal when they're filling out their questionnaires.
Yeah, so create letters. The reason we have two letters is because we're doing this through the management through a third party. So we want to send an introduction from us directly, saying expect a letter from Synergistic saying that will talk about the questionnaire and the process we're going to get you through. Okay, so you also have to look at how this is going to function. You kind of have to think of beforehand what things are going to happen. For example, we are going to get some pushback from vendors. We already know that other covenant entities that we may send this questionnaire to may come back and say, we already comply with HIPAA ITEC, so we don't need to respond to the survey. And I think this has already happened. Also, what if the answers are not what we expected? We have to determine those actions, and we can simplify the process by making decisions at the front end if we can. And it's definitely where the executive support is going to be needed. Because some decisions could be tough for the organization. It could cost the organization some money if we determine that the vendor is not HIPAA compliant per our questionnaire. Are we ready to terminate a contract with the vendor, or are we ready to go and into more negotiation when, I don't know about you, but anytime there is a vendor setup, it should be set up last week because everything is usually at the last minute. And then the other thing I would say is you have to consider developing a grading system, which you're never going to get 100% of the answers you're expecting, but you have to determine which level of answer is the right level of answer for you. But I also think you have to identify the showstoppers. In other words, there are some answers to questions that will make the BA potentially non-compliant. And at that point, to me, these things become showstoppers. You cannot deal with a non-compliant business associates anymore. Lou?
Yes, so the next step is you want to, send out the questionnaires, the information that you're looking for. Like Francois mentioned before, you always want to start small. That way, everybody's not overwhelmed with the amount of data that you get back. That way, it also gives you a chance to, tweak the process. So by the time you get to the second cycle, where you start adding more of the BAs, you have a well-oiled process. So you also want to identify, who is responsible for monitoring the responses. So we're going to use Synergistic to do that, but we will also monitor those responses ourselves and look for things that really jump out that look high risk. So this is going to be a lot of work, at least in the beginning. I think that once we filter down, tweak this process, I think it'll start running a lot smoother. And then once all the business associates are in there, I expect this to actually grow, where maybe some of those business associates will actually want to use it for their business associates. So it would be nice to have one portal to actually show compliance, and maybe even at some point branch out to, if you're looking at vendors, maybe you can actually see their compliance ahead of time, where they can give you access to some kind of compliance letter, or that's already existing in this portal.
Yeah, I want to go back on the fact that it's ongoing and a lot of work. That basically, it means some resource allocation of some kind, and we did not have the resource, and that is why we're going through a third-party Synergistic to manage this process for us. Again, a model that we've used for other areas, and it's working very well. Of course, you then have to analyze the result. Take a look at the percent responses that you got, because if you are getting a very low percent of responses, it could be that you're not asking the right questions, or they're too complicated. So you need to really tune your questionnaire. Check on accuracy of questions. Ask the right questions so you can cross-reference. And of course, then you have to make some decisions depending on the results and the answers. Is this vendor HIPAA compliant or not? I also suggest to store the information in a database so that you can compare answers from one year to another, so that you can see if there are major changes that happen at the business associate level. No?
Yep. And then, like I said, you're constantly reviewing this process. You want to tweak the letters, if you're getting pushback, tweak your questions. Maybe, you may find out that some of the answers lead to different questions, so you want to tweak your questions that you're asking so you can just get that all up front. Make sure you're actually sending it to the right contact person, and then try to figure out what is enough time for the business associate to actually return these answers. So, and another question, are we treating the vendors the same way within each category? That's important because, like I said, some are higher risk than others.
Right, and even within the same category of risk, you may have a single consultant compared to a big consulting firm. Are we treating them the same? I mean, you want a sense of fairness in the process. Then, of course, you start over. Just like good process, it's an ongoing process. So you start over. It's part of the life cycle approach. This will, if you pick the right tool, I think we did. You can get to every vendor every year, and that really shows due diligence. And then finally, you try to keep the process simple for the vendor, for the business associates. And I think the web questionnaire with attachment is certainly a great step towards this.
Yep. So to wrap this up, make sure you do it right. Analyze the consequences. Make sure you have your executive support, which could include having a plan B. Whether they're accepting the risk or not, or continue to go with the same business associate, or terminate a particular contract. Right, and last couple of points is to this is still our data, even though the business associate has hold of our data. This is still our data, and we're responsible for it. So sometimes it's good to remind the business associate of that fact. And then last but not least, by doing this, you can demonstrate to auditors. You can demonstrate the oversight over the business associates, which proves due diligence and goes miles towards a better audit.
Okay, so back to me. Thanks, Francois and Lou and Mac. We're now in the Q&A section of the webinar. And so there is a question, and we'll direct this to Mac. So in the event that there's a temporary employment agency that provides a variety of resources to clients of theirs, and in the case where they provide one or more employees that access PHI for a covered entity, in that regard, is a temporary employment agency in itself a BA?
So the answer is they very well could be. If the temporaries that they provide to the covered entity are employees of the temp agency, then the temp agency and those individuals are going to have access to PHI. Then the temp agency is definitely a business associate. If, however, the temp agency provides 1099 resources to the hospitals that they serve, or the covered entities that they serve, so that the individuals that they're providing are independent contractors, then they may not be a business associate. Maybe that individual, as a subcontractor to them, ends up being the responsible party. So it depends on the relationship they have with the folks that they provide to the covered entity. The other aspect of this is how the covered entity actually treats those individuals. So in other words, if the covered entity treats those individuals as workforce members, then the covered entity takes responsibility for those individuals, not the temp agency. So it all depends on the relationship between them and the covered entity, them and the employee or the person that they're providing, and what access is involved.
Okay, great. Next question is, what should we do if we know that a business associate has breached another client's PHI? Not ours, but another client's. Who wants to take that one?
So I'll take it from a principal perspective. You know, anytime that you're aware that somebody has potentially compromised the privacy of patient information, you have a responsibility to report that. Now you may start by reporting that to the covered entity involved, but the bottom line is you have a responsibility just ethically to the individuals who may be potentially harmed by it, to notify somebody that you're aware of that situation. So I think first and foremost is you need to report it to the right person.
Yeah,
I'll let Lou and Francois give their response.
Yeah, I was going to add that if one of your business associates has breached someone else's data, you better look at your own data that they're handling. You know,
yep.
So you kind of have to look at that aspect by saying, okay, if they breach somebody else's data, have they done the same to mine? And they have not. You kind of have to see how the breach happened to make sure that it doesn't happen to yours.
Right, and I also want to add, you know, if you don't feel comfortable going to that company, there are other, usually anonymous ways of reporting that, like a corporate compliance line. That way, you know, if you feel like you may, you know, damage a relationship or something like that, but you should definitely still report that.
Okay, great. Next question. So we're planning to implement both a pre-contract assessment for BAs and also an ongoing assessment every year. In your organizations, are those different to some degree, or are they pretty much the same? So that's probably for Francois and for Lou to consider.
Yeah. So the questionnaires are a little different. Not that much different, but just a little different. There are a little tweaks between a yearly assessment because you're just confirming the original questions, and you may be asking new questions if requirements have changed. But if you've asked someone if they have an SSA 16, the next time you're not going to ask if they have it. You're just going to ask them to provide it. That, you know, that's so the questions could be a little different from the initial to the yearly questionnaire, the ongoing questionnaire.
Right.
Okay. Lou, you have any comments?
No, I definitely agree with that. And also, you know, you may want to potentially have them fill out another questionnaire if they're going through a major upgrade of their application, you know, changing data centers, you know, anything like that. So you would definitely want to make sure that questionnaire gets out to them while that's happening or right after that happens. Preferably before if they're you know, going through a major upgrade, because you want to know what new security features are in the application. If anything changed, maybe it actually reduced the risk of, based on, you know, what you found in the original one, it may actually reduce some of the risk that they originally had.
Okay, great. Another interesting question. So when the tiers are developed based on risk, so you have, let's say you have high, medium, and low. So just conceptually, when you're looking at the low-risk BAs, what does that really mean? Does it mean they get done last? Does it mean we have to do them at all? You know, resources are tight, so that question came in.
So I'll answer it first and from the process perspective, and then let Lou and Francois answer it from the priority perspective. So from the process perspective, in this process, the answer is they get handled at the same time all the others get handled. So in other words, when we go through the process of going through the classification with the covered entities, in this case Lou and Francois are Inspira and Virtua, and we take their vendor community and put them in the various classifications that fit them based on what they're doing for them. the one doesn't receive a letter any quicker than the other, or doesn't go through the process any quicker or slower than the other. In fact, they all, once they're classified, they all get their letters. They all go into the process, and the only thing that's different is the level of scrutiny that they're given. So one may only have to answer a questionnaire, while another may have to answer a questionnaire and provide other documentation, like a copy of their SAS 16, for instance, if they're hosting a system or some data. But it's not that the lower end organizations, or BAs, if you will, from a risk perspective, get handled, sometime down the road after we handle the first ones. Basically, everybody is put into the system. And that's the beauty of automating this process, is that once you get everybody in the system, once you get everybody classified, then the system takes over and it begins to communicate with all of them independently and concurrently. And so you get all of your vendors through that process a lot quicker. Go ahead, Luke.
Yeah, this is Francois. I totally agree with that. Actually, you said it so well. I don't have much to add. This is the whole point of going through a third party utilizing a web tool is that we can address all BAs every year, and that's certainly a goal of this process, is so that we are thorough in the approach and we don't forget anybody.
Okay.
Right.
Lou, you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, and I agree with everything that was mentioned so far. But so just to add on to that, just a difference maybe in some of the questions and answers, right? So, if you have a hosted application, you would definitely want to know more questions about disaster recovery, how they're storing your data, who has access to it. Versus, an internal application, right? Because you know that what your disaster recovery is around that. You also know how you're controlling access to the vendor. So it just may be, how some of those questions apply to the vendor.
All right, great. Another question just came in. Will we be able to have access to a hard copy of the answers to the questions, please? Well, from one standpoint, the webinar is being recorded, so there will be a link to the recording, and we're going to provide a link on our website, and I'm sure Synergistic will too, and New Jersey HIMSS. That's one way to replay the questions and answers, and as far as a hard copy goes, we can put that together if that's necessary. Anybody else want to add to that?
No, I think that's good, Jerry. I think obviously we're all available. You've got our addresses there as well. There was another question that came in, Jerry. I don't know if you saw it or not. It looks like it came in from Tom. And it basically asked the question, and he said, to confirm, are cell phone companies transmitting information, not BAs? And again, I'm going to give you a qualified answer, Tom, and it depends on what they're doing. So in other words, if the cell phone company is literally just providing support for calls, meaning there are no other services associated with that account for information, so they're literally just transmitting calls from point A to point B, then it may be that they're not a business associate. But if they provide texting support, messaging support, email accounts, a lot of the things that are typically associated with cell phones today and cell phone services, to where you could have protected health information either transmitted via text or email, and they're hosting that for you, then they are a business or could be a business associate. So again, it just depends on what they're doing and what services they're providing and whether or not they're taking possession of EPHI. And if they're hosting it, they're taking possession of it, they are a business associate.
Yeah, let me add this. I know that some of the vendors are definitely coming to that realization because Google will sign a business associate agreement. They have one that they can propose. So does Microsoft. They will sign business associate agreements. So these are things that are kind of new. I don't think that Google was doing that, has been doing that for a long time. It just, I think, made that available, which, you know, of course they realize that that makes their service a little more palatable for anybody who's looking for outside storage. But people are realizing that, that those business associate agreements are necessary. So.
Yeah, that's true. And one point there to keep in mind with some of these larger companies like this, for instance, and Google's a great example of this. Google typically will not sign your business agreement. They want you to sign their business agreement. And you have to, and you need to read that business associate agreement very, very closely, because what Google has done, and of course this is probably so that it's manageable on their end, is basically they have limited the services and the scope of services and the scope of utility of their services that you can have if you elect to have them or enter into a business associate arrangement with them. So what I mean by that is, the minute you say I'm using your service to transmit protected health information, you have to sign that agreement. When you sign that agreement, they disable certain functionality as part of your Google service, and there are certain aspects of Google that you no longer have, you no longer can use. So it's not like you have a Google account today and you sign a BA and you continue to operate as you are today. If you sign that business associate agreement with them, you may lose certain functionality and certain services that they provide for those users that don't have a BA with them. So read that agreement very closely.
Okay, well, if there's no further comments, then first of all, I want to thank you, Mac, Francois, and Lou. Excellent panelists today. Did a great job. Thanks to all of the participants who attended today. And also a thanks to the folks behind the scenes, Marvin and Pamela, who assisted with the webinar from a technical standpoint. So timing is perfect. It's on the hour. Maybe we're 2 minutes late. No big deal. Have a great day, everyone, and we'll let you know when the recording is available and the PDF is available.